and welcome back to my garden. The first time I went to visit Rio in February 1995, I didn't speak Portuguese, so to try and get to meet people, I found myself at Lord Jim's in the evening, a British pub in Leblon, and while I was there, it was a nice enough pub. Played a bit of darts, which was a thing that I used to do. I met this Swiss guy, Rene, who decided to show me the sights, give me his slice of Rio, his sort of expat version of it, and introduce me to his local friends. And one evening, I got talking to this astonishingly, I'm not going to say beautiful, sexy girl whose name eludes me, but for want of a, well, let's just call her Roxanne. Anyway, we got chatting, and at a certain point, I asked her, well, what do you do? And she said, well, in the tourist season, I go to Copacabana with my towel, bikini, perch myself in front of the Copacabana Palace Hotel, which is, that beach is, and actually one of Rio's oldest, swankiest, most ostentatiously expensive hotels. So she sits herself down in front of the hotel and starts looking around until she finds the right guy, someone who's the right sort of age, obviously very wealthy, beautiful, that she might find attractive, and she gets chatting to him. And if he passes muster, they end up going out for a few weeks while he's in holiday in Rio, or a few days for that matter. And she said he'll take me to the best restaurants, the best clubs, buy me the clothes I want, take care of every want and need, and at the end of the holiday will leave me a very large tip, at which point she might have winked. Brazilians like winking. So Roxanne was a good name. Now, I wouldn't call her a hooker. I would say she was a high-class escort. And you might be wondering why I'm telling that story, but if you recall last week, I dealt with the first of my sort of money questions, which was how much is enough? And this week I thought I'd look at an interesting question, my second question. Would you do this if it wasn't for the money? In the case of Roxanne, the answer would have been an overwhelming yes. The guys that she chose, and she had amazing sort of manipulative skills. You could see that quite quickly. The guys that she chose were guys that she would have loved to have spent time with anyway. They happened to also meet the criteria that they would treat her rather nicely, thank you very much. And she was pretty upfront about all of that. She said, look, in a holiday season, I can make $25,000 or more. It all depends. And then when there's no tourists, well, there's plenty of wonderful Brazilians that I want to get to meet. And at that point, my needs are taken care of, so I can select on another basis. Well, if you can put the sort of morality of all that to one side, it's a pretty, for her, it was a pretty good way to live her life. It seemed to me, certainly. And obviously, I had no vested interest because she was way, way, way out of my league, whichever way you chose to slice it. But it's such a good question. Would you do what you're doing if you weren't being paid? If you took money out of the equation? And I've thought about it from my own perspective. Would I have taught people or would I teach people if I wasn't being paid? I mean, was I a school teacher just in it for the money. And there was a certain point where I might have said yes, when I was working at swanky private schools, of course we were there because we were very, very well paid. But the fact of the matter is that, I'd helped children after hours. I'd taught people at all sorts of schools before that. I taught people, when I was at school. And since leaving the teaching profession, I continue to help people who need help and ask, and I don't charge them any money. So, for me, the answer to that question would, of course, be yes. And what I'm doing now, making art, I would do that, irrespective of whether people bought my art or not. Well, if I'm being truly honest, and again, I'm sorry for the wriggling, but we've had a bit of rain, so you know the drill. I don't make enough money just from my art to justify doing that. So art certainly is something I do for love, for the creative urge, and I'd like to make it work on a professional basis, but that is another story altogether. And one might say, yes, but Neil, teaching and art are vocations, are things that people do because they love doing them. But I would take you to task there. If you look at art, let's look at unquestionably the highest earning artist in the world today, and I'm going to say it, bête noire, the infant terrible, Damien Hirst, not such a youngster anymore, but at the very beginning, his notorious Shark. Well, he wouldn't have made that Shark if it wasn't for the money. It's been quite clearly explained. The sum, which may have been in the region of £50,000, was a commission coming through the Saatchi Gallery. There was, and he had to make a piece of art that could be sold for £50,000. That was his remit. It had nothing to do with his sort of voice as an artist or his visual language. It was about how can I make as easily as possible art that could be sold for 50 grand. Would he have made that art were it not for the money? Of course he wouldn't. Not in a million years. Because if he had, if he was going to, then like one of his fellow students, whom I believe the idea was ripped off from, maybe it wasn't a student or it was another artist at the time, but there were artists who were exploring the world of dead animals in formaldehyde or whatever it is you stick it in to preserve it. And they were doing it and not selling their art. So, the genius of Damien Hirst was in selling something. He was a businessman, an entrepreneur. It's probably a longer rant on Damien Hirst than was entirely necessary, but you get the idea. And in other vocations, I think the same is true. I mean, if you take the medical profession, here in Brazil, at private hospitals, there is an astonishing number, it's over 80%, I think, an astonishing number of births are C-sections. Just ridiculous. And it's done so that the appropriate specialist can be booked in advance. It can fit in with his golf schedule. I'm being cynical, but to some degree it is that. It can fit in with the hospital's programming. It is not a medical necessity. Would the doctor perform the C-section if he received the same money for a natural birth or invasive, unnecessary surgery? Because, of course, on occasions, that is the only way to safely bring that child into the world. But they are doing this planned well in advance of any medical sense of urgency. So no, they wouldn't. They are doing it for the money. And they might say to me, but Neil, we have bills to pay. This is the way, we can make our practice work. It's expensive being a specialist. And I shed a tear or two for them. Okay, not really. But I will refer them to the question from last week. Do you know how much is enough? How much do you really need? And if you actually thought about it carefully, and you looked at a bigger sort of picture, you wouldn't be performing that sort of surgery on that kind of frequency, because it's not necessary. You're doing it, simply put, for the money. And I guess at that stage we look at other sorts of careers, and the late David Graeber, the LSE economist philosopher and popularizer of the idea, the classification, bullshit jobs, has pointed out very clearly, based on probably quite solid research, how many people are doing jobs that quite simply are totally and utterly unnecessary. And if they're totally and utterly unnecessary, they wouldn't be doing those things were it not for the fact that someone is paying them to do it. And in other jobs which are perhaps not totally unnecessary, the worker, the professional, may find themselves sometimes doing something because they are asked to by a superior, because it fits into some grand scheme that is entirely unnecessary and almost certainly not part of what that person would do by choice. So why are we doing that? And I've pointed out the one, I guess, obvious reason, because we are tied into financial necessities, which may be mistaken financial necessities, a sort of lifestyle creep, where we feel we need to do something because we get onto the treadmill, the hamster wheel, and that's where it takes us. And perhaps also we do those things because of the third question that I'm going to look at next week. It's a success criteria. That paycheck, the status of a particular job or working at a specific company or place, or in a particular city, that brings with it status and buying power to acquire things that signify that status. And that's why we do those jobs. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to suggest that you should pen your resignation letter immediately if you feel after this video that perhaps you're doing a job that isn't really, and you know it, isn't really what you want to be doing, or is even necessary at all. Because you can't untangle yourself from that web that easily. Someone might be saying it's all very well for you to speak like this, Neil, but I'm aware of that, and it took me at least 10 years to kind of disentangle myself from the teaching profession and eventually be settled here. And I did it, I don't want to say risk-free, but I managed that process. All the same, I think that this is a question worth asking. And you need to be brave to tackle the answer you come up with, or the answers. So that's it for this week. I trust you're well, your lives are filled with joy, and until next week from a sunny Brazil, ciao.